We place absolute faith in data today. Like we pull up a dashboard, look at a trend line, and just accept it as ground truth.
Right, we just assume the numbers are facts.
Exactly. But there is this quote from an anonymous British judge serving in India back in 1929 that I think completely shatters that illusion.
Oh, the Chowkidar quote.
Yes. He noted that government officials love to amass statistics. They take the raw figures, raise them to the nth power, take the cube root, and draw these wonderful, complex diagrams.
Making it all look incredibly scientific.
Right. But he warned that you must never forget that every single one of those figures comes, in the first instance, from the chowkidar, the village watchman, who just puts down what he damn pleases.
That is such a perfect quote. I mean, it captures the central vulnerability of literally any analytical system.
Right, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can build the most sophisticated statistical models on the planet, but if that primary data collection is flawed or just subject to the whims of a single observer, the entire superstructure is compromised. The math just cannot save you from bad inputs.
Which perfectly sets the stage for what we're looking at today. We are exploring a really brilliant paper by Tapen Sinha about PC Mahalanobis and the National Sample Survey Organization, or the NSSO.
Yeah, which sounds like a very dense bureaucratic topic at first glance.
It does, but Sinha's analysis reframes this entire era. It's essentially the origin story of modern data collection. Okay, let's unpack this. It's a story about how one visionary figured out a mathematical framework to bypass that village watchman problem entirely.
And to really grasp the scale of what Mahalanobis achieved, you have to look at the sheer void he stepped into. Post-independence India in 1947 was essentially a statistical black hole.
Just zero reliable data.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was tasked with building a modern industrialized nation from scratch.
Right.
But how do you allocate resources or plan 5-year economic agendas or prevent famines when you have absolutely no reliable data on national production or household consumption?
You're just flying a jumbo jet completely blind.
Exactly. That desperation for a dashboard of national metrics is what led Nehru to appoint Mahalanobis to a key economic committee in 1949, which rapidly birthed the National Sample Survey in 1950.
But the architecture for that 1950 rollout wasn't just invented overnight. Tapen Sinha's paper points out that to understand the NSS, you actually have to jump back to the 1930s.
Right, to his earlier experiments.
Yeah, that's when Mahalanobis ran a massive, and at the time highly controversial, experiment proving that you don't need to count every single blade of grass to know the health of the entire field.
Which was a huge pushback against the traditional census model. Back then, the census was the accepted gold standard.
Because the logic is simple, right? If you want to know what's happening, count everything.
Right, but censuses carry astronomical price tags. And beyond the cost, they paradoxically introduce massive systemic errors.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. When you deploy an army of temporary, poorly trained enumerators to count hundreds of millions of people across a vast, chaotic geography, the sheer logistical friction means you miss entire populations.
Oh, I see. Or you end up double counting others.
Exactly. So Mahalanobis hypothesized that a rigorously designed sample survey could actually yield more accurate data than a full census, at a tiny fraction of the cost.
The cost reduction aspect is fascinating, but it trips up a lot of people when they look at the raw numbers. Like in the Bengal jute crop surveys from 1937 to 1941, the paper outlines this massive expansion.
Jute was India's prime export at the time, so the stakes were incredibly high.
Right. So Mahalanobis starts with a pilot covering 120 square miles at a cost of roughly £9 per square mile. Then he scales the survey up by a factor of 500, covering 60,000 square miles.
A massive jump.
Huge. Yet the total cost barely increases, dropping the per unit cost down to just 17 pence per square mile.
Which looks like magic math to a layman.
I mean, wait. If you expand a sample survey to cover a massive area, shouldn't the cost and chaos scale up proportionally? How does doing more work save money?
It seems like it should, yeah. But this is the beauty of the statistical mechanism he was pioneering. The fundamental law of sampling is that the accuracy of your estimate, like your margin of error, depends primarily on the absolute size of your sample.
Not the fraction of the total population.
Exactly. Not on the fraction of the population you're sampling.
Meaning, once you figure out the baseline volatility of the data, you don't need a million new data points just because the map got bigger.
Precisely. It's the exact opposite of a census. In that initial 120 square mile pilot, he had to sample incredibly densely to understand the variance of the jute yield. He needed to figure out how much the crop changed from one acre to the next.
Right.
But once he established that baseline variance, expanding the geographical bounds didn't require him to maintain that same dense grid over the whole state.
Oh, so he only needed to add enough strategic points to account for new macroregions, like different soil types or rainfall zones.
Exactly. Plus, the massive fixed costs like survey design, the mathematical modeling, training the core team, those were already spent.
Ah, I get it. When he expanded to 60,000 square miles, he was just spreading those initial fixed costs over a vastly larger denominator.
Right, while only marginally increasing the actual field sampling.
It's the ultimate proof of concept for large-scale sampling. I mean, he proved that an emerging economy didn't need to bankrupt itself running a census just to understand its own markets.
But proving it's cheap is one thing, but proving it's accurate is another.
Exactly. Which brings us to how Mahalanobis actually insulated this system against the whole village watchman problem. Tapen Sinha breaks down the Mahalanobis playbook into 3 distinct pillars.
Right, starting with what he called optimum survey design.
So what does that mean in practice?
Well, Mahalanobis' approach survey methodology is an economic optimization problem. In statistics, you're always battling variance, the error or uncertainty in your data. But in the real world, you're battling your budget.
Yeah, you only have so much money to spend.
Exactly. So he developed complex mathematical models to achieve the absolute maximum precision for a strictly fixed budget constraint.
Meaning, he figured out how to optimally allocate resources across India's wildly diverse landscape without overspending in areas that wouldn't yield mathematically significant returns.
Right. Then there is the second pillar, pilot surveys.
Which is interesting because running a small test before a massive launch seems totally intuitive to us today.
Oh, sure.
But wait, if we think about India's staggering diversity, like over 700 languages, deserts, mountains, tropical coasts, a pilot survey in the flat agricultural plains of Bengal tells you absolutely nothing about the logistical realities of surveying the mountains of Kashmir.
That's a really good point.
So how does a pilot actually help solve geographic variance?
Well, that is a crucial distinction to make. The pilot surveys weren't actually designed to establish a baseline of socioeconomic data that could be projected onto other regions.
Oh, they weren't.
No, they were designed to test the instrument itself.
Oh.
Mahalanobis used these small-scale pilots to stress test the questionnaire logic.
Like seeing if the questions even make sense to people.
Exactly. He needed to know if a specific phrasing of a question about, say, household income translated effectively across different dialects without losing its statistical intent.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, he was testing the field procedures, measuring how long an interview actually took, assessing the training levels required for the enumerators. If a question consistently generated confused answers in a pilot, it was scrapped or redesigned.
So it wouldn't contaminate the national data pool. You're calibrating the tool, not the result.
Precisely. Which leads us to the third, and frankly, the most brilliant pillar.
The interpenetrating network of subsamples, or IPNS.
It's a mouthful, but it's genius.
The paper highlights this as the ultimate defense against bad data. To understand IPNS, think about how we verify things today. It's like sending 2 different secret shoppers to the same restaurant independently. If their reviews completely contradict each other, you know someone is messing up.
What's fascinating here is that IPNS isn't just a basic double check. It's built into the very mathematical fabric of the survey.
So it's more like taking 2 completely independent teams, giving them differently calibrated thermometers, and sending them to measure the climate of a city completely blind to each other.
Right, and if their final temperature trends map onto each other flawlessly, you know you've captured the true climate.
Exactly. So how did Mahalanobis execute this in the field?
The method involved drawing the total sample in the form of 2 or more entirely independent subsamples. And these were often surveyed by different teams, sometimes even at different times.
So they couldn't collude.
Exactly. The brilliance here is that by calculating the difference between the estimates of these independent subsamples, Mahalanobis could generate a direct measure of the total survey error.
So it captures both the sampling error from the math and the human error from the field.
Right. It acts as this unavoidable statistical dragnet.
So if an enumerator in the field got lazy, like maybe it was raining, so instead of walking to the edge of the village, our metaphorical village watchman just sat under a tree and filled out the forms himself.
The IPNS would instantly flag it. The forged subsample would show a statistically impossible deviation from the independent subsample.
Oh, wow. So it completely neutralized the ability of an individual to inject bias into the national data set.
Whether that bias was intentional or totally accidental.
So with those three pillars, optimum design, pilots, and IPS Mahalanobis essentially constructs a statistical fortress. He launches the National Sample Survey in 1950.
Which then evolves into the NSSO.
Right. And the methodology is so bulletproof that the entire developing world, which is struggling with its own lack of data, starts paying very close attention.
The international demand for this methodology was immediate. I mean, Mahalanobis recognized that India couldn't just be an island of data in a blind world.
So he takes it global.
He does. He became this immovable fixture at the United Nations Statistical Commission, literally attending every single session from 1946 until 1970.
Wow, that is dedication.
Yeah, he relentlessly pushed the UN to adopt large-scale sample surveys for developing nations. He argued that waiting around for full censuses would just paralyze economic development in the post-colonial world.
And he didn't just advocate for it, he built the training ground. He co-founded the International Statistical Education Center, or ISEC, in Calcutta in 1950.
To teach these exact methods to the world.
Yeah. And Tapen Sinha's paper includes this highly relatable detail about the ISEC that I just couldn't ignore.
Oh, the housing issue.
Yes. We're talking about an institute established to teach the most advanced logistical and mathematical survey frameworks to the global elite. Yet their own 1953 annual report reads like a complaint from a university housing board.
It's profound.
They are managing millions of data points flawlessly, but the administration is deeply frustrated because they can't secure a residential hostel for the international trainees. They're complaining that having students scattered across Calcutta is severely hampering their cultural activities.
It's a great reminder that you can conquer national data logistics, but securing a dorm room will always be a fundamental nightmare.
Exactly. The friction of the physical world always asserts itself.
But despite those logistical headaches, the throughput of ISEC was monumental. The paper notes that between 1950 and 2022, roughly 2,000 statisticians from nations like Syria, Kenya, the Philippines, and Afghanistan traveled to Calcutta.
And they absorbed the Mahalanobis playbook.
Right, the optimal designs, the IPNS frameworks, and they took them back to establish or overhaul their own national statistical offices.
It essentially standardized truth gathering across the global south. The paper quotes the Nobel laureate economist Angus Deaton, who sums up this era perfectly. He stated that where Mahalanobis and India led, the rest of the world followed. He noted that most countries could only envy India's statistical capacity.
For a window of several decades, the NSSO methodology was really the undisputed bedrock for socioeconomic data gathering globally.
But the paper also details a pretty significant fall from grace. If India was the architect of modern statistics, why is the global standard today largely dictated by organizations like the World Bank? The transition seems to happen around the late 1970s and 80s.
Yeah, a cascade of challenges really hit the Indian statistical apparatus during that period. First, the death of Mahalanobis in 1972 removed the primary visionary and really the political heavyweight defending the institution.
Yeah, they lost their champion.
And following that, India found itself grappling with severe foreign exchange deficits.
Which means what for data collection?
Well, when the global computational revolution began, India literally lacked the hard currency to import modern mainframe computers and the necessary software.
So what does this all mean? The paper points to a massive internal headwind that is deeply ironic when viewed from today's perspective.
Oh, the resistance to IT.
Yeah. Today, the global perception of India is totally synonymous with IT infrastructure, software engineering, and digital dominance. But in the 1980s, the paper notes there was fierce bureaucratic and political resistance to computerization within the government.
The labor dynamics at the time were incredibly tense. There was this profound fear that replacing paper-based manual tabulation with computers would lead to massive job losses for government data entry clerks.
So the labor unions fought aggressively against modernization.
Exactly. Decades before the current anxieties about artificial intelligence replacing knowledge workers, India was having a bitter debate about basic automation replacing the abacus and the ledger.
And because they actively resisted upgrading, their methodology began to age in dog years. They were relying on massive single-visit paper surveys that primarily measured household consumption, and they were only running them every 5 years.
Which is way too slow.
Right. If you are a policymaker trying to respond to an economic shock, Waiting 5 years for a paper tabulation means you are looking at the light of a dead star. You're making decisions based on a reality that no longer exists.
And that technological lag created a vacuum in global development data.
Enter the World Bank.
Exactly. The World Bank, possessing both the capital and the mandate to modernize economic tracking, stepped into that void in the early 1980s. They launched the Living Standards Measurement Studies, or LSMS.
And they basically took the foundational sampling logic Mahalanobis proved, but supercharged it.
Right, with modern computing power and a completely different operational cadence.
Tapen Sinha uses Mexico's ENIGH survey as the perfect foil to India's situation here. Because Mexico was building this system with World Bank funding and oversight, they weren't wrestling with a massive legacy bureaucracy or powerful tabulator unions.
So they bypassed the paper era entirely.
Exactly. The contrast is stark. The Mexican ENIGH survey runs highly frequent iterations every 2 years instead of 5.
And it is fundamentally digital. But the most significant methodological leap was its dual focus.
What do you mean by dual focus?
Well, because India's economy was overwhelmingly informal and cash-based back then, measuring actual household income was historically viewed as impossible. So the NSSO only tracked what people consumed.
Oh, okay.
But the World Bank's LSMS methodology demanded and achieved rigorous measurement of both income and expenditure. By embracing microcomputers, they could capture highly granular real-time data to evaluate policy effectiveness almost immediately.
So India's hesitation basically allowed the center of global statistical innovation to shift to Washington, D.C.
It's a classic innovator's dilemma.
It really is. But falling behind technologically is just a matter of lost efficiency. Tapen Sinha's paper takes a very dark turn toward the end.
Yeah, it does.
It illustrates what happens when the core tenets of Mahalanobis' methodology are actively suppressed for political reasons. The consequences aren't just inefficient markets, they are catastrophically lethal.
The historical record surrounding China in the late 1950s provides a terrifying case study of this. In 1956, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai toured the Indian Statistical Institute.
And he was impressed, right?
Very. He was struck by the sheer operational power of what Mahalanobis had built. Recognizing China's own data deficit, he arranged for 2 top-tier statisticians, Wu Hui and Gong Jianyao, experts in agriculture and industry, to travel to Calcutta in 1958.
For a comprehensive, year-long study of the NSSO frameworks. So they spent a year absorbing the exact mechanisms we've been discussing, optimum survey design, IPNS, objective sampling.
Right.
But the tragedy is in the timing. While they were mastering mathematical objectivity in India, the political landscape back in China was violently pivoting toward the Great Leap Forward.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when Wu and Gong returned, the intellectual climate had become deeply hostile because the statistical theory they learned at the ISI was grounded in texts originally published in the U.S. and Britain. The state apparatus dismissed their newfound expertise as bourgeois.
Oh, wow. So they just threw it all out.
Yeah, the mathematically rigorous frameworks were totally discarded. In their place, the state-mandated, ideologically driven, worker intellectual approaches to data collection.
Which completely strips away any independent verification. They intentionally removed the statistical dragnet.
Exactly.
And once you remove the IPNS, that independent check that exposes human error or manipulation, the data becomes entirely subservient to political pressure. Regional leaders were expected to show massive, unprecedented gains in industrial and agricultural output to validate the Great Leap Forward.
So they had to show success no matter what.
Right, so they simply fabricated the numbers.
The state essentially demanded that every local official become the village watchman, just writing down whatever pleased the central government.
That is horrifying.
It is. And based on these wildly inflated, unverified production figures, the central government believed they had a massive surplus. So they exported grain and diverted millions of agricultural workers into useless steel production.
When the reality was catastrophic crop failure.
But without an objective statistical mechanism to shatter the illusion, the state just flew blind into disaster. Historian Frank Dicotter, who is cited in the research, estimates that at least 45 million people died unnecessarily in the ensuing famine.
Here's where it gets really interesting and almost painful to read. While they were studying in Calcutta, Wu and Gong specifically analyzed a survey that Mahalanobis had executed in 1943.
Oh, the Bengal Famine Survey.
Yes. Mahalanobis had deployed his sample survey methodology to accurately map the devastation and after effects of the 1943 Bengal famine. He had literally built the tool for measuring a localized collapse in real time.
And had Wu and Gong been permitted to deploy that exact pilot survey methodology upon their return leg, had they been allowed to run independent objective samples of crop yields, they could have generated the hard data required to alert the central authorities.
The famine might not have been entirely avoided, but the scale of the tragedy could have been vastly mitigated.
Absolutely. The objective data was a societal immune system,
Yeah.
and it was intentionally turned off.
It underscores that Tapen Sinha's analysis of PC Mahalanobis isn't just an academic retrospective on math. It is a profound demonstration of how methodology intersects with human survival.
Without a doubt.
I mean, we saw how one man in Bengal looked at the chaotic scale of India and realized you could harness variance to measure an entire continent for a fraction of the cost. He designed a system with IPNS that mathematically cornered the truth, preventing human bias from corrupting the national record.
And he exported that clarity to the developing world.
Right. And we saw, devastatingly, the cost in human lives when that clarity is rejected in favor of political narrative.
This raises an important question, though. The underlying truth here is that statistical methodology, no matter how flawless the math, is ultimately fragile.
How so?
It is completely useless if the political architecture surrounding it refuses to let the data speak. I mean, the math only works if you're willing to hear an answer you don't like.
Which leaves us with something crucial to consider about the systems you and I rely on today. Think about how modern economies, healthcare systems, and global logistics are currently managed. We are increasingly handing the steering wheel over to predictive algorithms and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's the new reality.
And we assume that because a machine is processing the data, the output must be a pristine, objective truth. But those algorithms are only as good as their training data.
Exactly. The inputs matter.
If that underlying data is still being harvested by bureaucratic systems where regional managers, corporate executives, or political leaders are massaging the inputs to hit a target, if we don't have our own modern equivalent of the IPNS checking the variance, then the AI is just laundering human bias.
That is a very sobering thought.
It makes you wonder, with all our technological power, are we really any safer from being misled than we were back in 1929 when the village watchman was just writing down whatever he damn well pleased?